Hello there, my loves. It's me. It's your Uncle Jimmy. I thought I'd begin today with this frightful sight of my noggin, just to ward away evil spirits, those that might happen upon this video and think, fuck that. They've all gone now, my loves. It's just you and me. But anyway, today we are reviewing. I haven't even got the bloody book on me. Damn it! Here it is. It's professional. It's The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. Here's the devil. Let's get the cover up there. So, yes, this was first published back in 1975. But it was actually made into a film back in 2002 featuring Richard Gere. Have any of you seen that, my loves? I haven't. All I've done is watch the trailer. But anyway, let's get a little clip up and see what it's all about. I've been a little bit naughty there, haven't I? That's not the Mothman Prophecies. That is, of course, a clip from Pretty Woman. Now, I do like that film. I'm not going to talk too much about Pretty Woman, but I do like that film. But I did find Richard Gere's character completely deplorable, and that piano scene itself very, very cringeworthy. But there we are, that's just me. It's those added tinklings of the keys that do it. Obviously done in post-production. That wasn't done on the day, of course. It wouldn't have sounded quite so pleasant. But there we are. Has any of you seen the film? I'd be interested to see what it's like. I've heard some things online. It sounds like the Mothman Prophecies film, not Pretty Woman, is actually not too bad, worth watching. A bit of a cult following these days, it would seem. But judging by the trailer, it seems as though, yeah, there are references to the book itself, although there's a bit of artistic license there in service to the filmic medium. I don't know, the bits about the telephone going off when it's unplugged, things like that, a little bit naughty. But my lads, we're not talking about the film, we're talking about the book. Come on. Now, I normally make notes, bare bones notes before I review a book. I'm not going to do that today. I just thought I would do it off the cuff, so to speak. I only read this last week, so it should be more or less there, I would say. Although I did dog-ear a couple of pages for some reason. I'll have to go back and have a look why I did that. But before we get to those dog ears, let's just talk about what the book's all about. So this is largely an account from 1967 and 1968, focusing on a place called Point Pleasant in West Virginia. And it focuses there because no end of strange phenomena was affecting this part of America for those 2 years. All different things going on. One of them chiefly being, of course, the Mothman appearance, a bird-like entity with a massive wingspan, but a giant man bird that didn't actually flap its wings, but kind of hovered everywhere in a malicious sort of fashion. The other thing is, referencing the shambolic thumbnail that I created for this video, it had very big red glowing eyes as well. Although descriptions of the Mothman are quite vague in this book. I think that's largely because they didn't really know what was going on with the devil's head. It didn't seem to have much of a head to it. The only thing that was noticed was the two glowing red eyes. So yes, the Mothman appears throughout this book in various ways, usually just sightings of him gambling about, really. But his appearance in the woods and various other places normally heralded other strange visitations, shall we say. I didn't realize this when I started the book. I didn't realize it would be accounts of UFO encounters and even accounts of being abducted, animal mutilations, all of the stuff we all know about, the Men in Black as well. So this was a really interesting deep dive into all of those things pertaining to the latter part of the 1960s. Okay, so right, the actual writing itself is serviceable. It's fine. The only criticism I have is that it is divided into sections, and each of them has a particular bent. It chronicles various experiences, accounts of various people that John Keel met and befriended. It also has some of his own ideas about what's going on throughout, which is interesting. However, whilst it is divided into sections, there's references to and fro to different people that feature it earlier in the book and then later in the book. But they are mentioned so fleetingly at times that you're thinking, oh, who is he talking about now? It's that kind of thing. It's slightly disjointed in that respect. It's not chronological. In some ways, I think it would have been better if it was more about his experiences of those 2 years and how things progressed, how things escalated and how things tapered away, resulting in the calamitous thing that happens at the very end, which is very, very strange indeed. Now, the biggest problem I find with anything like this is that, of course, it's all anecdotal. He may have done his due diligence collecting this material. Of course, every single thing is dated. Every account that he chronicles in this book is dated, the time, everything. So yes, that gives it the ring of authenticity. But of course, it's always third hand, isn't it? He's talking to people that have supposedly experienced these things, and then he's processing it through his own mentality, and then he's writing it. The writing then may change aspects of the story to make it slightly more interesting to the reader. So there's lots of different steps that have gone through from the actual event down to us processing it in our own brains. Anecdotal evidence is not evidence in my opinion, but there we are. That's all we've got to work with largely in this book. Interestingly as well, there was a slight overlap with things that were going on over in New Jersey, was it? With all those sightings of drones that they were called at the time. I did a video about it when I was getting a bit scared about it all. Poor Jimmy is slightly susceptible to these things, my loves. I'm sure you know by now. I'm not quite all there. Wait a minute. I thought I was getting a nosebleed then. That would have been interesting, wouldn't it? Excuse me. But yes, that was very interesting because there is a part of the book, there's not much of it, but again, it's about the skies over New Jersey, I believe. And even more interestingly, the descriptions of these flying entities displaying lights that are green, white, and red directly reference the ones that were sighted earlier this year. So I thought that was an interesting and quite sinister parallel. Who knows what all that's about, my loves? So I don't know how much to say without spoiling this book. I don't think it's possible to spoil it really, because there's just so much here to wade through. I would say that his own ideas or theories about the strange things that were seen and experiences of people being abducted and things like that, he puts it down to there's something paranormal going on. I think he definitely goes that far, but the fact that there's some kind of force in the world, certainly around this period of time, that are able to project hallucinations on people. So a lot of this stuff didn't necessarily happen, but people believed it was happening to them. But it was instigated by something or someone. So I didn't get the impression that John Keel was an advocate of aliens visiting us, for example. Now, interestingly, he was also in direct contact with these supposed alien mentalities, which is one of the stranger aspects of the book. He didn't actually meet them in person, but did it through surrogates. So normal people all spread around the country, in America largely, I think, that were in communion with another intelligence. And so they would speak to him, sometimes passing messages over the phone, or sometimes taking over the body or the voice of the person on the other end of the phone and telling him things. That was all very odd. But interesting, if you can believe what he's saying, interesting in that it was these people or these intelligences were predicting things that later happened. Things, quite odd things, actually, to the extent that they were able to tell him about things that he had just done, for example, that no one would have witnessed. Those kinds of things, quite interesting. Of course, I suppose you could have also had like cameras in his place or something. I don't think cameras were that small then. But anyway, he was undoubtedly being bugged. His phone was being bugged. And a large part of this is played out about the troubles he has with his phone. Now, as referenced, or as I talked about in the actual trailer, not the clip of Pretty Woman, he does have various vexatious experiences with his telephone. Now, the film appears to be set in contemporary early 2000s, but of course, I think it would have been better if they'd set it back in the 60s. But of course, the main method of communication back then was, of course, the telephone. So it's interesting that all of these weird things that was going on via the telephone, various beeps and strange noises, metallic sounding voices, all of these things pertaining to the telephone itself. Now that's definitely of its time. Now, of course, these things, I suppose they're playing havoc with people's phones and the things that they're attempting to film from their telephones or cameras, things like that. But that was interesting that it locked it into the time it was set. And I thought, with the modern knowledge that we have, the experiences that we have now, the technology that we have now, we can look back and kind of analyze this experience he has with the telephones and consider whether there was some kind of artifice going on here, some kind of creative writing on the part of John Keel. It's possible, but yeah, something was definitely strange going on there. And he did find evidence that his phone was being bugged. There was also the suggestion that he was kind of going slightly mad, and that there were people, who knows who doing it. It could have been the government, perhaps, but people messing with him in various ways psychologically, and the phones being a part of that. So you start wondering whether what you're hearing from him is actually true. Interestingly, I've since read that there is some doubt cast upon his ability to recount things truthfully, shall we say, because there was an earlier version of this book, and it was quite different to the version that we read now, apparently. So what the hell's going on there? Why were things changed? He never admitted this, by the way. But something I suppose you'd need to know slightly more about John Keel himself. But again, if we think about the current situation with the interest in UFOs, for example, you hear the same voices over and over again. I won't mention them, but you probably know of them. And each of them seem to have a vested interest in it outside of disclosure, if you can call it that. They all have something to gain. And I think that's always something that casts suspicion over what they're saying. Of course, John Keel was probably all the while he was collating various evidences was thinking, I'm going to turn this into a book, motherfucker, and make a lot of money. So there's all of these things that cast doubt on what's being told. However, I'm sure a lot of these accounts from these people haven't just appeared in this book, but they were disseminated, yes, widely in other ways, in local news and radio and things like that. Whether or not these individual people were making these stories up because of the current craze of UFO sightings, who can say? But a lot of these stories appear to come from people that, well, John Keel either suggests that they don't have anything to gain, or they're not intelligent enough to make up these kind of wild stories. And the stories they're telling are very, very bizarre indeed. Let's put it that way. We're not just talking about lights in the sky and occasionally seeing something landing here. We're talking about really wild shit here, like buildings that appear out of nowhere and then fuck off again. People that take trips to another planet, my loves, full of naked men and women. It sounds like the kind of experience I might have after a few too many of the old grogs, my loves. But yes, very far-fetched stuff. But who can say? I mean, the picture being painted at the time was definitely coloured by, I would say, science fiction of the times, or the more of the golden age of science fiction. We're talking about imagery and galactic societies and civilizations, that kind of thing, all working in unison and looking after the earth, that kind of shit. So it definitely, there's influence there from the current times in terms of science fiction and fiction in general. Because by today's standards, a lot of these stories seem quite, I don't know what you would call it, really provincial in terms of scale, or naive in terms of the idea of a intergalactic union of do-gooders, perhaps. But again, if we go back to one of my favorite shitty books from the early 70s, Iando Binder's Night of the Saucers, and what was the other one? Night of the Saucers and Attack of the fucking Saucers, I don't know, something like that. But at the time, I mean, it was pretty badly written, and Fane, the central character, was a great big hulking beast that was a misogynist at heart, and a damn good fighter that he learned all of his skills at high school, of course. But other than that, a lot of the accounts in that story are derived from these kinds of accounts, shall we say, the Men in Black, the way these flying saucers move, like a leaf falling from a tree, those kind of weird things. So a lot of those really odd parts of those Iando Binder stories, I thought, well, that's just bad writing. But it seems that he's taken this from, what was going on around him. Now, I mentioned Men in Black there. I think this will probably be the last thing I talk about here, but there's a lot of mentions of this phenomenon. And the Men in Black here are portrayed as not government operatives secretly harassing witnesses and what have you, but rather suggesting that these Men in Black were off-worlders. So they weren't entirely human. And there's a lot of descriptions calling them Oriental in appearance due to the shape of their eyes, and that they are heavily tanned, for example. So I suppose, yeah, interesting. But also the way they spoke, the fact that some of them didn't seem to know how to do things that are inherently human. They didn't quite know how to eat properly in restaurants. I don't know why they would bimble into a restaurant and attempt to eat in front of everyone, but there we are. Lots of unusual situations and scenarios with these Men in Black. Always men, although there was a mention of a woman as well, Woman in Black. But anyway, that I might have said enough there. If I can think of anything else now, I will pop it in. I just remembered those dog ears I was talking about. Let's have a look, see what I dog-eared the pages for. Let's put my glasses on. Okay, so I'll read this anyway, but this is explaining what I was talking about earlier with the ways that these entities were communicating with John Keel. By mid-July, I was in indirect contact with the entities through 3 different systems. First, contactees would relay my questions to them and relay their answers back to me. I was still extremely skeptical, so many of my questions were complicated and beyond the abilities of the individual contactees to answer, even if they spent hours in a library trying to research the answers. Second, I was able to communicate by mail, sending letters through the US Postal Office to addresses which I later discovered were non-existent. I would receive replies by mail, often the very next day, written in block letters. Some of these replies covered several pages. Third, I was sometimes able to speak to the entities by telephone. A contactee would call me and inform me that an entity was present in his or her house and wished to speak to me. Sometimes I just asked questions and the alleged entity whispered the answer to the contactee, who relayed it to me. Sometimes a strange voice would come on the line and speak to me directly. In some, if not all, of these instances, the contactee probably entered a trance state and the voice came from their own vocal cords, just as spirits speak through mediums at seances, if you believe any of that shit. Okay, so that was an account of the ways these entities were speaking to John Keel. Okay, that's all I'll read. I thought there was something else I was going to mention, but no. But it's worth reading just for the very bizarre accounts of people that have been abducted and what have you. Yeah, worth a look. But anyway, let's get the book down and give it a damn confessing, my love. Yes. So, out of 5, I'm going to give this. Actually, I'm going to give this 4 out of 5. Just decided. Now, I suppose taken as a whole, it is a bit of a mission to get through just because it's so disjointed and there's so much shit coming your way. You're trying to make sense of it, but at the same time, it's putting you in his position at that time. There was so much going on, so much to experience directly, a larger part being anecdotal, and the strange ending, the calamitous ending, shall we say. That's all worth reading about. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think for me personally, the other thing I enjoyed was the fact that it's the setting of the late 60s in America, a very specific time in history, and a time that I'm quite interested in, really, in terms of America in general, really. I've always had a fascination of the 1950s and 60s over in America for some reason. I have no idea. So this book doesn't make any attempt to set the scene in terms of the historical context, only a little bit here and there, because, of course, this is as it was published back in 1975. But yeah, they definitely missed a trick with the film. They should have set it in the 60s. It would have lent an interesting take on what was going on at the time, I suppose. But anyway, there we are. There's my review. Thank you very much, my loves, for watching. Anyway, I'll see you next week with another book review, I imagine. Anyway, cheerio. Love you.